Most people think they know what capitalism is built on. Free markets, less government. Everyone follows their own interests, and somehow, an invisible hand turns all that self-interest into prosperity. But what if I told you the man behind that famous idea, Adam Smith, never actually believed in the version of capitalism we associate with him today? In fact, some of the people who use Smith's name to defend free markets are defending exactly the kind of behavior he warned us about. Welcome to Financial Secrets, where money, power, and history come together. Let's go back to the real Adam Smith. Smith was born in Scotland in 1723, and the Britain he lived in was anything but a modern free market economy. Trade was controlled by royal monopolies, guilds controlled industries, powerful companies dominated international commerce. One of the biggest was the East India Company. It had its own army, controlled territories, and operated with so much power that it looked less like a company and more like a government. This was the world Smith studied, and what he saw was a dangerous connection between economic power and political power. Smith repeatedly warned that when merchants become too powerful, they can use that power to manipulate the rules in their own favor. He famously argued that people in the same trade rarely meet without eventually conspiring against the public. That doesn't exactly sound like, just leave businesses alone and everything will work out. And here's another detail people often forget. Adam Smith wasn't trained as an economist, he was a moral philosopher. Before writing The Wealth of Nations, he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments, a book about empathy, morality, human behavior, and why societies hold together. Smith didn't believe greed alone could build a healthy society. He believed human beings needed morality, sympathy, and a sense of responsibility toward one another. Now let's talk about the phrase everyone remembers, the invisible hand. Today, it's almost treated like a law of economics. Let people pursue their own interests, and the market will magically produce the best outcome. Sounds simple, but there's a problem. Smith used the phrase invisible hand only 3 times in all his writings. 3. And none of those 3 uses described a universal law saying that free markets always fix themselves. The first use wasn't even about economics. Smith was discussing humanity's tendency to explain mysterious events through invisible forces. The second appears in The Wealth of Nations. Omdo nati. Smith describes a merchant who prefers investing at home because he's afraid of the risks of foreign trade. Not because he's patriotic, not because he's trying to help society, he's simply being cautious. Yet, his personal decision accidentally benefits domestic industry. That's it. Smith wasn't saying greed always creates social good. He was showing that individual decisions can sometimes produce unintended benefits. The third use is even more revealing. Smith describes wealthy landowners who consume as much as they can, but eventually have more resources than they can personally use. A person might own thousands of acres, but they can only eat 1 dinner. So some of that wealth ends up reaching other people, not because the rich suddenly become generous, but because even greed has physical limits. So Smith's famous invisible hand appears in 3 very different contexts: superstition, fear, and the limits of human consumption, hardly the foundation of modern deregulation. So how did this tiny metaphor become one of the biggest ideas in capitalism? Over time, economists, politicians, corporations, and free market advocates turned the invisible hand into something much bigger. A simple observation became a doctrine. The message became, leave markets alone. Reduce regulation. Trust private interests. The market will take care of the rest. But something important was left out. Smith's warnings about monopolies. His warnings about cartels. His warnings about corporations becoming too powerful. And especially his warnings about economic power influencing government. Smith understood something that still matters today. A market isn't truly free when the most powerful players can rewrite the rules. Look at the modern economy. Technology giants control huge amounts of information. Large corporations can crush smaller competitors. Financial institutions can become so important that governments feel forced to rescue them when they fail. So ask yourself, are these really free markets? Or are they markets shaped by people powerful enough to influence the rules? That's where the irony of Adam Smith becomes almost impossible to ignore. The man who warned about concentrated economic power became the mascot of an ideology that often celebrates it. His philosophy was simplified, his warnings were pushed aside, and the invisible hand became a slogan. But Smith's actual message was much more balanced. He believed markets were powerful. He also believed markets were created by humans, and anything created by humans can fail. That's why rules matter, institutions matter, competition matters, and power needs limits. Smith wasn't calling for the destruction of markets. He wanted markets strong enough to encourage trade and innovation, governments strong enough to prevent abuse, and societies wise enough to demand fairness. He never promised that an invisible hand would save us. His message was much harder. We have to understand the system and take responsibility for fixing it. Because markets don't automatically correct abuse. Power doesn't regulate itself, and unchecked greed can eventually destroy the very system that rewards it. Maybe the biggest lesson from Adam Smith isn't that the market always knows best. Maybe it's that we should never confuse a market with a force of nature. Markets are designed by people. Rules are written by people. And ultimately the question is, who gets to write those rules? Because markets don't automatically correct abuse. Power doesn't regulate itself, and unchecked greed can eventually destroy the very system that rewards it. Maybe the biggest lesson from Adam Smith isn't that the market always knows best. Maybe it's that we should never confuse a market with a force of nature. Markets are designed by people. Rules are written by people. And ultimately the question is, who gets to write those rules?
Like and follow for more fascinating stories and insights.